Hello, welcome to the morning show with me, Martin King.
And me, Claire Brock. Well, coming up on today's show, after losing their daughter Cliona to a brain tumour 6 years ago, Brendan and Terry Ring have helped almost 100 families cope with the everyday financial costs of having a sick child.
This lady in Cork, she has a sick child in Crumlin, and she did not have the cost to travel to Crumlin. That's the truth. And we came across her 6 weeks ago.
Well, so you can't wait to leave school when you're a child, but in later life, many people return to education just for the love of it. We'll be meeting some of those attending adult night classes to keep the mind active.
Plus, as the Blackrock Baths are demolished, I discover the history of this South Dublin landmark.
And I went up and I was standing at the edge, plucking up my courage, and the next minute over the loudspeaker, a mischievous attendant announced to the public, Billy Morrison will now dive off the 10-metre board. So I had no option but to swallow my fears and go for it.
And from making use of your weekends to getting some exercise, we'll be chatting to wellness coach Dr. Michael Arlosky about how the decisions we make affect our health. But first today, when their daughter Cliona was diagnosed with a brain tumour, Brendan and Terry Ring did everything they could to ensure that she got the best treatment.
But like so many families of sick children, the couple faced not only emotional turmoil, but also mounting financial expenses that come with constant trips to the hospital and medical bills. Following Cliona's passing away, the couple resolved to offer financial help to other families in a similar position.
You know, that there is a big financial strain on the families that have critically ill children, and particularly people that, you know, have low income or no incomes at all. And like a typical day, if you had to travel like we did from Limerick to Crumlin for treatment for Cliona, for her chemotherapy, which we did for 15 months, which is a long time. You know, a train journey for both of us and Cliona, getting on a taxi at Houston, going to Crumlin and coming back on a taxi, and you'd have a tough day, so you'd normally just take, you know, go to the shop, pick up a takeaway and come home. And we often looked in that. I think that's the bones of €200. You know, that's the kind of cost that's out there. And that's just one day. We met an awful lot of families that travel from all over the country, and it's brilliant that Crumlin is there, but it's a long way away. When you even get to the hospital, if you're staying overnight, toiletries, you may need different types of clothing, picking up the newspapers, going for coffee, having your lunch. All these things start to escalate and become a problem.
And Brendan and Terry Ring join us now. You're both very welcome along to the show today. For your daughter Cliona, it was an 8-year journey for you guys, and a long journey, and that was a physical one as well as a mental one, and everything you went through. Could you take us back to when you were told about what had happened, Cliona, and what doctors said to you? Could you tell us about that, Brendan?
Sure. I remember very well, Cliona came home from school on Friday evening, and Terry noticed a mark on her eye, and she was a little bit concerned what happened, and she had banged into the blackboard, and Terry decided to bring her into the hospital. I was involved with something else on the evening, but when I got home, they still weren't back, and Terry said, I think you should come into Limerick. You know, there's something up with Cliona. So eventually we were transferred to Cork next day, and that weekend we were told that Cliona had an inoperable brain tumour.
She was only 7 at that stage.
Just 7.
So what did they do for her?
I suppose what happens for a couple of weeks is that they take a lot of scans. She has MRIs and stuff like that, and they try to determine what type of tumour she had. And she had a low-grade astrocytoma, and low-grade meant, you know, that it was treatable, but in Cliona's case it was inoperable. And that's where the problem was, and always, you know, that's what caused the problem, really.
That must have been quite frustrating, that it was something that was low grade, something that was essentially benign, and yet because of its location, Terry, there's no way they could get at it.
It was, and it was very hard to comprehend. You know, we kept asking questions, well, maybe some other doctor might do it, or, you know, will we have further tests, or are you absolutely sure about this? Because you can't get your head around the fact you've just been told your daughter has an inoperable brain tumour. She's too young to be diagnosed with something like that, but unfortunately that's the way it is.
And did she know what was going on?
Initially she didn't, because she had the tumour was on the right hand side, so that affected her left side, and her eyes were causing a problem. Her vision was down, so in the beginning we said, we're not sure what's going on, but we think it's a problem with your eyes. But she was referred to Crumlin, and the staff, the medical people in Crumlin, again, were terrific. But they advised us to tell her that she has a cancer, and it is a tumour in her head, but not to be unduly concerned about it. So at 7, she understood a little bit, but not to the full extent, yeah.
Okay. It was around this time when you were making those journeys from Limerick to Dublin for chemotherapy, and you say, Brendan, that you were fortunate from the point of view that you were able to take on the cost of these trips. Because, of course, at that time, you're not thinking of money. You just want the treatment. But of course, this is how the Cliona Ring Foundation came to be.
Yeah, you know, that's where the problem lies, as well as having the emotional trauma. The financial aspect of it is huge, and you really don't realise it. It's like everything else in life until you go through it. What costs lie behind a child's illness? For us, as I said, to travel to Dublin from Limerick, that typical day would cost us about €200. I mean, we were blessed that we were able to afford that ourselves, and we did that throughout the 8 years. And but on that, if Cliona needed to go out further to the States and needed a lot of funding, we would have gladly taken on some help, because that would be outside our remit. And we looked at all of that, but we decided to stay in Ireland with Cliona.
And that journey that you're talking about, that would have cost you about €200 to do, that's going up and back, taking into account all the travel expenses and everything else that goes with it, down to car parking. How often did you have to make that journey, Terry?
In the beginning, it was probably, depended on her blood tests. If anybody who's gone through chemotherapy will understand what that means. But if her bloods were good, usually it was maybe every 4 to 5 weeks. And that went on for maybe 14, 15 months. But now we had to make trips too, where by the time she got to hospital, on that her bloods weren't good enough, and they say, well, look, sorry, but she can't have her chemotherapy today. We'd have to go home again and make that trip again, maybe 10 days later. You know, these are the things, the hidden costs that people actually don't fully realise.
Of course, if you're going home that night, that's fine. But if you're staying overnight, you may have to find accommodation somewhere, because at that time there wouldn't have been the Ronald McDonald House, and as brilliant as it is, it's only got room for so many.
Well, that's all, but it just wasn't there in our day. You know, that's 14 years ago. Back then, all we could do was maybe take sleep at the side of the child's bed. We hadn't a problem with that. That was, you know, that was fine. We were near our child, so we were happy enough to slum it that way.
And I suppose during this time in making all these journeys, you would have met other families in a similar situation, I suppose. I mean, that's what inspired what you're doing now. Brendan, and some stories, I mean, some people were seriously struggling an awful lot to even go in and visit their children and spend any amount of time with them.
Yeah, recently, I think about 6 weeks ago, we had a lady on from Cork, and I'd say she would have travelled in the past to see her child, but at this stage, all her means of funding to do that they were gone. So they dwindled away. So her last call was on the Cliona Ring Foundation to see if we could, you know, write a cheque effectively to help her to go up and down to Dublin to see her child. That's a terrible situation to be in, that you can't actually go to see your child. And then when you get there, there's other costs involved again. Again, the fuel, the parking, lunches, and you need to be able to treat your child as well. Remember, when they're going for chemotherapy, you have to try and distract them. And the only way to distract kids is with toys or gifts and stuff like that, or presents, or you promise them something, and you go ahead and you do that. So there's a lot of costs involved in that.
And something that you were pointing out there was, in making that journey, when we think of sick children, I suppose we think of them being brought to the hospital, treated, the nurses being around, all the medical staff, and they are there. But at the very point that your child gets sick, you're putting a really ill child into the back of a car, and they could be sick the whole journey up, and you're dealing with that and everything that goes with that. That must have been very tough for you guys over the years, and 8 years of that.
It was, and you know, we can still vividly remember going to Cork with Cliona, and she had these shunts inside her brain that used to transfer her fluid, and if they stopped operating, Cliona wouldn't live. So basically we would have to put her on the back of a car and bring her to Cork and get her looked after. But we were blessed again. We had a car, and one of us could sit in the back, or I could drive, and she could lay on Terry's lap. and we'd get to Cork, but we met families who didn't have cars.
You came across a family from Waterford.
Yeah.
Who had to take a taxi from Waterford.
Yeah, for me, that's where it all kind of started to a degree. I remember that day, remembering Cliona was in there with them. It was a huge shock to walk into Crumlin for the first time, St. John's Ward, massive. And they arrived in, and they had only a baby, a couple of months old, and I got talking to the dad. He did not have a car, couldn't afford a car, had to get a taxi from Waterford up to Dublin and go for to get child's treatment and go back down again. Horrendous. And your own car too brings privacy. You know what I mean? Because unfortunately, kids are getting sick, vomiting when they're travelling, and all that happens. And you've got to be, bring your bits and pieces to take care of that. But if you're in a taxi and there's people around you, it has to be very difficult.
Of course it is. Of course it is. Unfortunately, you lost Cliona 6 years ago. She had to go for surgery in, I think it was July of that year.
Yeah. She was being scanned in July. She had surgery on the first week of August. Because she became unwell, the surgeons in Cork had the chat, and they said, we need to do something for Cliona because she was becoming progressively unwell. Her balance wasn't great and her vision had deteriorated. She had surgery, but unfortunately things didn't work out as they had hoped, and she died in December then, in 2006.
Okay. You obviously went through the grieving process and then decided to keep her memory alive. This was the way to go. The Cliona Ring Foundation. Yeah,
Cliona's Foundation. Our friends and neighbours and family approached us within 12 months and said, we'd like to do something for Cliona. We'd like to keep her memory alive. What do you think if we made a CD and everybody would be on board? And that happened. And fantastic CD. And they said, well, what are we going to do with the money from this CD? Have you any thoughts or ideas? And we thought, well, the most striking one was that help families who weren't as well off or as lucky or as blessed as us, to help them on their journey to look after their sick child. And that was the start of it.
And of course, by the very nature of the foundation, a lot of money is required to keep it running and to help those families that you're talking about, to make life a little easier at what is a very, very tough time for them. Where's the money coming from?
Well, for the last 5 years, it's raised locally, I suppose, really down in Limerick by our family and friends. We do everything possible to raise funds. We've just completed our 5th annual charity cycle, and we'd almost 300 on that, so that's a great fundraiser. Christmas is coming up now, so we'll have our Cliona Ring Foundation Christmas cards and calendars. And we always have an annual foundation night, and it gets everybody away from their own stresses of life, and they come, we all meet together in Bulligan Castle, and we have a great night of music and entertainment, and we get some celebrities to come down and support us, and they've been very good to us, and that's a great fundraiser for us.
Right, so how can people donate if they want to help, and what way can they do it, Terry?
They can do it online. They can go onto our website, www.cleonaringfoundation.com, and there's an online facility there. Or they can do it, the bank account details are there as well. Make a lodgement directly. Lovely. And mycharity.ie, if anybody wants to do a fundraiser, hold an event or have some occasion, they can donate through that as well.
Okay. Well, it says an awful lot for you as people that as you were going through this awful thing with Cliona, you were thinking of others that were just around you and their difficulties, and this foundation is there in her place. And if Cliona is anything like the people that you are, I'm sure she was a wonderful, wonderful person.
She was great, yeah. She made us who we are, really, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming in to talk to us today, and we wish you continued success with the foundation.
Thank you very much.
We hope that people will be as generous as they can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Terry.
Martin.
And thanks, Brendan, for coming in today.
After the break, back to school for adults will be